The advertisement in the Coldwater Gazette had been running for 3 months, which should have told Sarah something. Housekeeper needed, remote ranch, room and board included, inquire at Hendrick's General Store. No mention of wages, no phone number, just that terse invitation that had apparently scared off every other woman in the county. Sarah folded the newspaper and tucked it into her worn leather satchel. She had exactly $43 to her name, a bruised cheekbone that was finally fading to yellow, and a burning need to disappear into somewhere so remote that her ex-husband's fists could never find her again. Remote sounded like salvation. Old Mr. Hendricks looked up from his counter when the bell above his door chimed, his rheumy eyes widening slightly when he saw her. "Help you, miss, the ranch job," Sarah said, keeping her chin up despite the way his gaze lingered on the remnants of her injury. "Is it still available?" The old man's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, concern, something that might have been pity. "You sure about that? It's Hollister's place up on Widow's Peak. Man's got a reputation for being difficult. Difficult doesn't scare me," Sarah said, and meant it. After 3 years of walking on eggshells around Dan's volatile temper, difficult was just another word for Tuesday. Hendricks sighed and pulled out a piece of paper, drawing her a crude map. 15 miles up the old logging road. 4-wheel drive recommended, but I suppose you could make it on foot if you're determined. He's expecting someone by week's end, though I'll admit I didn't think anyone would take him up on it. "What's wrong with him?" Sarah asked, studying the map. "He's mean as a rattlesnake, for one. Lost his wife and daughter in a car accident 5 years back, and hasn't had a kind word for anyone since. Goes through housekeepers like most men go through coffee. Last one lasted 3 weeks before she hitched a ride back to town, crying the whole way." Sarah folded the map carefully. "I'll manage." The walk took her 6 hours, her feet blistering inside her only pair of decent shoes, her suitcase growing heavier with each mile. The road narrowed as she climbed, pine trees pressing in from both sides, their shadows long and cool in the late afternoon light. When she finally rounded the last bend, the ranch spread before her like something from another century. The house itself was a massive log structure, 2 stories of weathered timber with a wraparound porch and a stone chimney that rose like a finger pointing at God. Behind it stretched corrals and outbuildings, all in various states of disrepair. Mountains ringed the property on 3 sides, their peaks still white with snow despite it being June. A man stood on the porch, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by shadow and the brim of his hat. Sarah approached slowly, aware of how she must look dusty, limping slightly, probably half wild herself after the long walk. "You the housekeeper?" His voice was rough, like gravel being crushed. "Sarah Mitchell, I saw your ad. You know what the job entails. Cooking, cleaning, general housekeeping, I assume." He stepped forward into the light, and Sarah had to work to keep her expression neutral. Callum Hollister was perhaps 45, with a face that might have been handsome before grief had carved deep lines around his mouth and between his brows. His eyes were the color of storm clouds and just as welcoming. A scar ran from his left temple into his hairline, white against his tanned skin. "You assume wrong," he said. "I need someone who can handle ranch work too, feeding chickens, tending the garden, helping with the horses when needed. I run cattle up here, and during calving season, you'll be up at dawn and working until dark. The house is a mess because I don't have time to deal with it. Can you handle that?" "Yes." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving over her face, lingering on the fading bruise. "You running from something? Does it matter?" "Depends on whether what you're running from is going to show up on my property looking for you." "He won't," Sarah said, meeting his eyes. He doesn't know I left, and by the time he figures it out, I'll be long gone from here too, if that's what you're worried about." Something flickered in Hollister's expression, too quick to identify. Husband, ex, almost, the paperwork's filed. He nodded slowly. "I pay $200 a week, cash. You get room and board, Sundays off after morning chores. I don't tolerate drinking, men visitors, or drama. I keep to myself, and I expect you to do the same. We're not friends. I'm your employer, you're my employee. Understood? Understood. Your room's upstairs, second door on the right. Kitchen's a disaster. I expect dinner at 6. He turned to go, then paused. "And Miss Mitchell, I'm not a patient man. Do your job, stay out of my way, and we'll get along fine." The house was worse than she'd imagined. Dishes crusted with dried food filled the sink. Dust coated every surface. The refrigerator contained mostly beer, some questionable cheese, and condiments. Sarah stood in the kitchen, surveying the damage, and felt something unlock in her chest. This was a problem she could solve. This was chaos she could control. She rolled up her sleeves. By 6 o'clock, the kitchen gleamed. She'd found a chicken in the freezer, thawed it in cold water, and roasted it with potatoes and carrots she'd discovered in the root cellar. The table was set with mismatched plates she'd scrubbed clean, and fresh coffee perked on the stove. Hollister appeared exactly at 6, his boots scrubbed clean of mud on the porch mat. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the transformed kitchen. "Sit," Sarah said, bringing the platter to the table. "It's hot." He sat slowly, still looking around as if he'd walked into the wrong house. Sarah served him, then took her own plate to the counter, intending to eat standing up. "What are you doing?" His voice made her jump. "Eating, at the counter, like some kind of servant. You said we weren't friends. I also said you get room and board. Board means you eat at the table like a human being. Sit down." She sat, though she kept her distance, taking the chair at the opposite end of the long table. They ate in silence, the only sounds the clink of silverware and the old house settling around them. "It's good," he said finally, grudgingly. "The chicken, thank you. Last housekeeper couldn't cook worth a damn. Before that, the one before her burned everything she touched." Sarah said nothing, just continued eating. She'd learned long ago that sometimes silence was the safest response. The days fell into a rhythm. Sarah rose at dawn to feed the chickens and collect eggs, then returned to the house to make breakfast: oatmeal, bacon, toast, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Hollister ate quickly and disappeared outside, often not returning until dinner. She spent her days scrubbing years of neglect from the house, washing windows, beating rugs, organizing cupboards. The work was hard but honest, and every clean surface felt like a small victory. Hollister was true to his word about keeping his distance. He rarely spoke beyond necessity. "More coffee. The fence in the north pasture needs mending tomorrow. Storm coming in." He was gruff, impatient, and clearly uncomfortable with having anyone in his space. But he wasn't cruel, Sarah realized after the first week. He was just absent, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. She found evidence of his old life in boxes shoved into closets. Photographs of a laughing woman with honey, colored hair, a little girl with his same gray eyes and her mother's smile. Children's books and toys packed away but not discarded. A wedding album that made Sarah's throat tighten when she accidentally opened it while cleaning the study. "Put that back." Hollister's voice came from behind her, sharp as broken glass. Sarah jumped, nearly dropping the album. "I'm sorry, I was just. I know what you were doing. Don't." He took the album from her hands, his fingers gentle on the leather cover despite the hardness in his voice. "Some things are private. I apologize. I should have asked before cleaning in here." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and some of the anger drained from his face. "It's fine, just that room, leave it alone." She nodded, and he left, taking the album with him. The second week brought rain, 3 days of steady downpour that turned the world gray and soft. Sarah baked bread, pies, cookies, filling the house with warmth and sweetness. Hollister said nothing about it, but she noticed he ate 2 slices of apple pie after dinner, and the cookie jar slowly emptied throughout the day. On the third evening of rain, she found him on the porch, sitting in one of the weathered rocking chairs, staring out at the mountains that were barely visible through the mist. "Coffee," she offered, holding out a mug. He took it with a nod, and she turned to go back inside. "Stay," he said. "If you want." She sat in the other rocker, and they watched the rain together in silence. After a while, he spoke. "They died in the winter. Black ice on the highway down the mountain. Emily, my wife. She was driving. Lizzie was 6. His voice was flat, reciting facts. "I was supposed to go with them. Town Christmas party. But one of the cows was having trouble with a breech birth, so I stayed behind. Told them I'd meet them there." Sarah said nothing, just listened. "I got the cow sorted out. Mother and calf both fine, and then the sheriff showed up at my door. He took a long drink of coffee. Everyone said it wasn't my fault. Acts of God, they said. But if I'd been there, if I'd been driving, you'd probably be dead too," Sarah said quietly. "And then who would remember them?" He turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his face. "My mother died when I was 12, Sarah continued. "Breast cancer. My father blamed himself for not catching it sooner, even though the doctors said it wouldn't have mattered. He spent the rest of his life punishing himself for something he couldn't control. It didn't bring her back. It just meant I lost both of them." Hollister was quiet for a long moment. "Your father's still alive?" "No. Heart attack 3 years ago." She didn't mention that it was at her wedding to Dan, that she'd spent her honeymoon planning a funeral instead of celebrating. Some sorrows were too tangled to explain. "The bruise," he said. "Your ex-husband did that. Among other things. You press charges." "No point. His brother's the county prosecutor back home. I tried once, early on. Nothing came of it." She set down her empty mug. "So I left instead." "Good," Hollister said. "A man who'd hit a woman isn't a man at all." They sat in silence after that, but it felt different somehow. Less like 2 strangers sharing space, and more like 2 people who understood something about each other that didn't need to be spoken. The third week, disaster struck. Sarah woke to the sound of frantic mooing and Hollister's shouted curses. She threw on clothes and ran outside to find him in the barn, struggling with a cow that was clearly in distress. "She's trying to deliver, but the calf's stuck." He said without preamble, "I need you to hold her head, keep her calm." Sarah didn't hesitate. She'd grown up on her grandmother's farm, had helped with births before. She knelt in the straw, speaking softly to the cow, stroking her head while Hollister worked. It took an hour of careful maneuvering, both of them covered in blood and worse, before the calf finally slipped free into the world. "She's breathing," Hollister said, relief evident in his voice. He cleared the calf's airways, rubbed her down with straw. "Good girl, good girl." The mother cow lowed softly, already trying to turn to her baby. Sarah sat back in the straw, exhausted and exhilarated. Hollister looked over at her, and something shifted in his expression. He almost smiled. "You've done that before." "My grandmother raised cattle. I spent summers with her." "You didn't mention that when I hired you. You didn't ask." This time he did smile, just a little. "Fair enough, come on, let's get cleaned up." After that, the distance between them began to close. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small increments. He started eating breakfast with her instead of taking it outside. She joined him for coffee on the porch most evenings. He taught her to ride his gentlest horse, a mare named Bess, so she could help check the cattle in the far pastures. She discovered he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh when she least expected it. One morning in the 4th week, she came downstairs to find wild flowers in a jar on the kitchen table. Neither of them mentioned it. The change in Hollister was subtle but undeniable. He started fixing things around the house: the loose step on the stairs, the screen door that didn't close properly, the window that stuck. He brought in fresh vegetables from the garden she'd coaxed back to life. Once she caught him humming while he worked in the barn. But there were still hard days. Days when he barely spoke, when she'd see him standing at the fence line staring at nothing, his shoulders bowed under the weight of his grief. On those days, Sarah learned to simply be present. She'd bring him coffee or work nearby without speaking, letting him know he wasn't alone without demanding anything from him. 6 weeks into her employment, a truck rumbled up the driveway. Sarah was weeding the garden when a man climbed out, younger than Hollister, with an easy smile. "Well, hello there. You must be the new housekeeper. I'm Jack Morrison, Cal's neighbor from the next valley over. Sarah Mitchell." She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "You're still here. That's got to be a record." Jack grinned. "No offense, but Cal's not exactly known for his sunny disposition." "He's been fine," Sarah said, somewhat defensively. Jack's eyebrows rose. "Has he now? Well, I'll be damned." He looked toward the barn where Hollister had just emerged. "Cal, good to see you, man. Came to see if you wanted to go in on a bull for breeding. New stock, supposed to be excellent." The two men walked off talking cattle, but Jack threw a look back at Sarah that was frankly curious. That evening, Hollister was quiet through dinner. Finally, he set down his fork. "Jack said you defended me today." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. He was making assumptions. He was making accurate observations. "I haven't been easy to work for. You've been fair. That's all that matters." Hollister studied her across the table. "Why did you really take this job, Sarah? And don't tell me it was just the ad. You could have found work anywhere." She considered lying, then decided he deserved the truth. "Because it was far away. Because nobody would think to look for me here. Because it was the kind of job that would make me invisible." She met his eyes. "Because I needed to disappear, and you needed someone who didn't mind being disappeared." He absorbed this slowly. "And now I'm not sure I want to be invisible anymore." Something passed between them then, something that made Sarah's heart beat faster and her breath catch. Hollister stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm going to check the cattle," he said, and left. Sarah sat alone in the kitchen, her dinner growing cold, wondering if she'd said too much. He didn't return until after she'd gone to bed. But in the morning, there were more flowers on the table, and a note in his rough handwriting. "Thank you for staying." The summer deepened into July, and with it came the high heat of mountain afternoons, tempered by cool evenings. The ranch work intensified: hay to cut and bale, fences to mend, cattle to rotate to new pastures. Sarah worked alongside Hollister more often now, and they developed an easy rhythm. He taught her to drive the tractor, to judge when the hay was ready for cutting, to read the weather in the behavior of the cattle. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat on the porch with cold beers. Hollister had started talking more about Emily and Lizzie, sharing memories that seemed to bring him both pain and comfort. Sarah listened, occasionally sharing her own stories about her mother, her grandmother, even the good memories from before Dan's love had turned poisonous. "Do you regret it?" Hollister asked suddenly, marrying him. Sarah considered the question seriously. "I regret not seeing who he really was earlier, but I don't regret learning that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Leaving took more courage than I knew I had." "It did," he agreed. "And coming here taking a job with a bastard like me, that took courage too. You're not a bastard. I've been a bear to work for, admit it. You've been grieving, there's a difference." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes seemed softer than she'd ever seen them. "You've been good for this place, Sarah. Good for me. I want you to know that." Before she could respond, the sound of an engine made them both turn. A truck was coming up the road, moving fast, raising a plume of dust. Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew, somehow she knew, even before the vehicle came into view. Dan's truck, the dent in the front fender from where he'd hit a mailbox in a rage, the bumper sticker he'd never removed. Inside, Hollister said, his voice suddenly hard, "Now, Cal, inside, Sarah, I'll handle this." She retreated into the house but stayed by the window, her heart hammering. Dan climbed out of the truck, and even from a distance, she could see he was drunk. His shirt was untucked, his movements unsteady. He'd always been a mean drunk. "Where is she?" Dan's voice carried across the yard. "I know she's here. I tracked her down, and you can't hide her from me." Hollister stood at the top of the porch steps, arms crossed, looking down at Dan with an expression of complete contempt. "You're trespassing. Turn around and leave, or I'll make you leave. That's my wife." Ex-wife, from what I understand, and even if she wasn't, she's an adult who can make her own choices. She doesn't want to see you. Dan's face flushed red. "You sleeping with her? Is that it? She run off to whore herself to some mountain hermit." Sarah saw Hollister's jaw tighten, saw his hands curl into fists. But when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost conversational. "I'm going to give you one chance to get back in your truck and leave. One chance. After that, things are going to get unpleasant for you. Big man, threatening me on your own property." Dan took a step forward, swaying. "I'm not scared of you. You should be." Dan lunged up the steps, but he was too drunk and too slow. Hollister sidestepped easily, caught Dan's arm, and used his own momentum to send him sprawling into the dirt. Dan scrambled to his feet, rage contorting his features. "I'll kill you. I'll kill both of you." "No," Hollister said quietly. "You won't." He pulled a rifle from where it had been leaning against the porch railing. Sarah hadn't even noticed it there. He didn't point it at Dan, just held it casually. "You're going to get in your truck. You're going to drive down this mountain, and you're never going to come back, because if you do, I won't be this polite. Do you understand me?" For a moment, Sarah thought Dan might be drunk enough, angry enough, to do something stupid. But something in Hollister's eyes must have convinced him. Dan spat in the dirt, climbed back into his truck, and spun out in a spray of gravel. Sarah stepped onto the porch, her legs shaking. Hollister set the rifle down and turned to her, his expression fierce. "Did he hurt you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Thank you. How did he find me?" "Doesn't matter. He's gone now." Hollister's hands hovered near her shoulders, as if he wanted to touch her, but didn't quite dare. "Sarah, I need you to know something. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not him, not anyone. You're safe here." "I know," she whispered. "I know I am." They stood there in the gathering darkness, and Sarah realized that at some point in the past 8 weeks, this place had stopped being a hiding place and had become a home. And the man in front of her had stopped being a cruel, distant employer, and had become something far more complicated. "Cal," she said softly, don't." He stepped back, his expression closing off. "Don't say it. You work for me. That's all this can be. Why?" "Because I'm 15 years older than you. Because you're running from a bad situation, and I won't take advantage of that. Because I already lost everyone I loved once, and I can't." He stopped, his voice rough. I can't go through that again." Sarah understood then. He wasn't protecting himself from being hurt. He was protecting himself from caring. "What if I'm willing to risk it?" she asked. "I'm not," he said, and went inside, leaving her alone on the porch. For 3 days, they barely spoke beyond what was necessary for work. Hollister took his meals outside or late at night, when Sarah had already gone to bed. The easy companionship they'd built evaporated, replaced by a painful tension that made Sarah's chest ache. On the 4th day, Sarah made a decision. She found Hollister in the barn, repairing tack. "I'm leaving," she said without preamble. His hands stilled on the leather. "What?" "I can't stay here like this. I can't be this close to you and pretend I don't care about you. So I'm leaving. I'll stay through the end of the week to give you time to find someone else." "Sarah." "No, it's okay. I understand. You're not ready. Maybe you'll never be ready. But I can't keep living in limbo, waiting for you to decide if I'm worth the risk." Her voice cracked slightly. "Because I know I am, Cal. I know I'm worth it, even if you can't see that yet." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "The day they died, I was angry at Emily. She'd forgotten to pick up feed from town the day before, and we'd argued about it that morning. Nothing serious, just one of those stupid married people arguments, and the last thing I said to her before she left was just try to remember this time." He set down the tack, his hands shaking slightly. "For 5 years, I've lived with the fact that my last words to my wife were angry and petty. That Lizzie's last memory of her father might have been him snapping at her mother over something that didn't matter at all." Sarah's throat tightened. "I swore I'd never care about anyone again, because the pain of losing them was worse than being alone. And then you showed up, with your stubborn courage and your kind heart, and you made me remember what it felt like to be alive." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm terrified, Sarah. I'm so damn terrified of loving you and losing you. But you're already losing me," Sarah said gently, "by pushing me away. At least if you let yourself love me, we'll have something real, even if it's scary." He crossed the barn in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt his chest heave, felt wetness on her hair, and realized he was crying. She wrapped her arms around him and held on, offering him the one thing he'd been denying himself for 5 long years: permission to feel. They stood like that for a long time, 2 broken people holding each other together in the dim light of the barn. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally, his voice muffled against her hair. "I don't know how to love someone without being afraid." "Neither do I," Sarah admitted. "But maybe we can figure it out together." He pulled back enough to look at her, cupping her face in his rough, calloused hands. "You're sure? I'm not an easy man, Sarah. I'm moody and stubborn, and I'll probably mess this up 100 times. I'm stubborn too, and I've survived worse than moody. We'll figure it out." He kissed her then, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and coffee and hope, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "So," Hollister said, "I guess this means you're not quitting." "Well, I'll need to renegotiate my contract. I don't think I should be working for someone I'm involved with. Conflict of interest and all." "Partner, then. Equal stake in the ranch, shared decisions, shared profits." "Cal, I can't accept. You've earned it. This place was dying before you got here. You brought it back to life." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You brought me back to life." Sarah leaned into his touch. "Partners, then, on one condition." "What's that?" "You take me to town once a month for supplies, and maybe dinner, a real date." "I think I can manage that." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Sarah noticed how beautiful the ranch was. The mountains rising in the distance, purple in the afternoon light. The meadows thick with wildflowers. The old house that had sheltered them both while they healed. That evening they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Hollister had his arm around her shoulders, and Sarah leaned into his warmth, feeling more at peace than she had in years. "I should probably apologize," Hollister said, "for being such a bear when you first got here. You weren't that bad." "I was terrible. Jack was right. I'm amazed you didn't leave after the first week." "I'm stubborn, remember. Besides, I saw glimpses of the real you. The man who brought me flowers. The man who taught me to ride. The man who stood up to Dan without hesitation." She tilted her head to look up at him. "I knew you were worth waiting for." He tightened his arm around her. "I'm glad you did. Wait, I mean." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast mountain sky, Sarah thought about the woman she'd been when she'd walked up that long road 2 months ago, broken, scared, running from a life that had nearly destroyed her. She thought about the advertisement that nobody wanted, the job that should have been a temporary refuge, the man everyone warned her about. And she thought about how sometimes the things that scare everyone else are exactly the things we need to save us. "Cal," she said softly, I'm glad I took the job nobody wanted." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "So am I, Sarah, so am I." Inside the house, in a box in the study, photographs of Emily and Lizzie smiled out at the world, their memories no longer a weight but a gentle presence. Outside, on a ranch that had been dark for too long, 2 people who'd been hiding from life finally stepped into the light together. The mountain night stretched around them, vast and full of possibility, and for the first time in 5 years, Callum Hollister looked toward the future and felt something other than fear. He felt hope.